Welcome back to the daily Rambam class. It is Thursday. We will start with a general look at where we are up to in the Rambam. We are learning the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, magnum opus, 14 volumes. We are up to volume number 8. Sefer Avodah, the Book of Temple Service. 9 subjects, 95 chapters. Let's take a look at these 9 subjects. We have the Beis HaBechira. We learned about the Beis HaMikdash, 8 chapters on that. We learned about the utensils. We learned about entering the Beis HaMikdash. We learned about forbidden offerings. And now we are learning about bringing the actual offerings. So if somebody wants to know how communal offerings are brought to the Beis HaMikdash, I mentioned communal offerings because actually the next volume of the Rambam is going to deal with private offerings, volume number 9. It's a very small volume if you look at the difference in number. But now we're not talking about private offerings, we're talking about the Beis HaMikdash as it is for the Jewish people as a whole. We're talking about Korbanos that are brought, not private ones, general Korbanos, large section with 19 chapters, but we are up to chapter 16, which means that please God, next week we'll move on to the next topic, also relating to offerings, but it's Tamidim or Musafim. We'll read about the daily offerings and the Musaf offerings on Yom Tov. That's coming up, please God, next week. But for today, let's take a look at chapter 16. Here it is. This is a summary of what the bringing of the offering speaks about. We spoke about what the offerings are and what they accompanies them. We discussed who brings the offering and how he brings it. We went through 4 different types of offerings. We spoke about eating kodshim, sacrificial meat, libations, and yesterday we began 2 days ago. Today is Thursday. On Tuesday we began to speak about pleasures, and tomorrow we will conclude that discussion. Let's take a look at chapter 16. Here we are. Pleasures continued. When a person vows to bring a large animal, but instead brings a small one, he does not fulfill his obligation. He did not fulfill his commitment. The title I posted was, are we fulfilling our commitments? Well, if somebody made a commitment for a big animal and he brought a small one, then he has not delivered. But if he vows to bring a small one and brings a large one, then he has fulfilled his obligation. He's brought more than what he committed himself to. So how does this spell itself out? If I said I promised to bring a lamb as a korban oila or as a korban shlabim, and he brings instead a ram, a lamb is a young animal in its first year. A ram, on the other hand, is one animal that's more than a year and a month old. Or if he vowed just a calf, again young, within the first year, and instead he brings an ox, which is already in its second year, or he vowed to bring a kid, which is a baby goat, in its first year. Instead, he brought an adult goat, then he has fulfilled the obligation. He brought more than what he committed himself to. If he vows to bring a burnt offering, either from lambs or from rams. So that was his vow. He said, I'm going to bring a burnt offering from one of the two, from lambs or rams. And then he brings the pilkas. The pilkas is a sheep that is in between. It's more than 12 months old, but less than a year and a month. Because we said a ram, halachically, is only once it's a year and a month. So what happens if it's in the in-between age? So we're not quite sure whether he has or hasn't fulfilled his obligation. When he said one or the other, did he mean only one of those two, either young or old? Or did he mean and everything in between? If a person vowed to bring an oila of either turtle doves or ordinary doves, again, 2 terms that refer to the birds at 2 different stages, but there's an in-between stage, and he brought birds that began to sprout yellow feathers, so they were already older than turtle doves, but they weren't as old as regular doves, Again, there's unresolved doubts whether he has or hasn't fulfilled his obligation. If a person said they'd bring a black animal and he brought a white one, or to bring a white one and he brought a black one, a male and he brought a female and he brought a male, he has not fulfilled his obligation because he did not bring what he said he would. So for those that are concerned about racism or chauvinism, this paragraph clearly is not one of racism or chauvinism, because if one was better than the other, then you'd be able to say, we said earlier, if a person committed himself to a smaller animal and he brought a more valuable one, he fulfills his obligation. If he committed himself to a better one and he brought a worse one, he has not fulfilled his obligation. But here, either way, there's no better or worse. We each have our role to play. And he said that he'd bring a particular animal and he didn't bring that, whether it was black or white or male or female. So he has not fulfilled his obligation, because every one of us have our special role to play. Okay, moving along. When one takes a vow without specifying the type of animal he is bringing, he should bring from the developed animals of the species he vowed to bring. Shouldn't just be a baby. If his place of residence, so it goes by his place of residence. If in his residence people commonly identify a particular animal to be brought as a particular offering, then he should bring whatever's done by that locale. So if he didn't specify what he was bringing, then you follow either a developed one, an older one, or if there is a custom, he'll follow the custom. So how does it spell itself out? If a person vowed to bring a burnt offering from cattle, rather bring an ox than a calf. Or he has to bring a ox, not a calf. If he says, I promise to bring a burnt offering, so what do people usually use when they say burnt offering? If when they say burnt offering, they even could be referring to birds that are brought as a burnt offering, then it will suffice at that. Even a young bird. But if the practice is to use that term only when somebody says I'm bringing a burnt offering, they mean usually by default the people in that place mean specifically cattle, then you should bring an ox. And you follow that system with regarding to all the Korbanos. If a person vowed to bring an ox, a ram, a lamb, a calf, or the like, you shouldn't bring the frailest specimen of that species. You shouldn't go for the cheapest, because their value is minimal. Nor is he obligated to bring the nicest, stockier specimen, of which there is no better. Instead, he should bring an average animal. If he brought a frail animal, he has fulfilled his vow. Maybe we can stop and talk about what this means for us for a moment. So when we make commitments, then how are we fulfilling our commitments? Are we fulfilling them to the minimal degree possible? That's not good enough. I mean, the truth is, if that's what we do, we just fulfill the commitment to the minimal level possible, then we have fulfilled our commitments. You're going to come and say you didn't fulfill it, you didn't fulfill it. But that's not what's recommended. That said, you're not required to fulfill it on the highest level either. But there should be somewhere in between. Elsewhere, the Rambam does say, we said earlier in, I think, this volume, that a person should give his best to Hashem. I think he spoke about when building the Beis HaMikdash. That the Beis HaMikdash should be made out of, if they could, whatever they can afford. If they can afford, even, I think he said, even to plate the floor with, I forgot if it was marble or gold, that they should do that according to their abilities. And from here, the Rebbe spoken from Breg about how we should give up our best to Hashem. It's a famous story in Zechronos, in Lubavitcher Rabbi's memoirs. It's a fascinating read. It describes the origins of the city of Lubavitch about 300-400 years ago, how it was settled. And it really, the author of the book, the Sixth Chabad Rebbe, really zooms into the headspace of the characters of the story and shares with you what their dilemmas were, what they were thinking of, what their lifestyle was like. You read it and you feel like you've entered into a different world. You've moved back to the shtetl. And in one of the chapters, he describes how there was a fire in the Lubavitch. And the whole town burned down. That's what used to happen in those days. Okay, everybody got back to work. They went back to the trees and started chopping wood. And I think it was Binyamin, was not known to be very lavish, but the house that he was building for himself seemed to be much larger than everybody else. People were a bit surprised. They didn't think it was of Binyamin's character to be building himself such a mansion. What did he need such a mansion for? And the construction continued, each man to his own home, until it became clear that Binyamin had built the shul before building his very own house. So before he even had a home to move into, he was already building this magnificent shul for the whole community.
Rabbi, we got load shedding in our area in Cape Town now. We now know our batteries, so I don't know how long that's going to last.
Oh no! I hope that we're able to have you with us for as long as possible.
Yeah, I don't know what other Cape Town people, if other people are, affected, but that's the Sea Point area.
Okay, please God, I should be here. Thank God I've got a backup for my computer and things. But I hope that you'll be able to stick with us as well. So back to the halacha, Michelle just asked, surely that when a person is making a vow, they should rather vow something intermediary and then give themselves the ability to excel. Absolutely. Because we never want to give more than what's expected, but you still have the opportunity to give more. The Rambam says, what's the person required to do? Back to the halacha we just read. He said he should not bring the frailest. So, he's not required to bring the best, although certainly you can if you want. And as we see over here, in chapter 11, we say, whoever desires to gain merit for himself should bring his sacrifice for the most desirable and superior type of them. So this is desirable, but it's not a requirement. Rather, what is required, the medium, and if you brought less than that, as long as it's still that same type, even if it was a very weak animal or cheap animal, he still has fulfilled his commitment, his vow. Finally, when a person says, I promise to bring an ox worth of money, you should bring an ox worth of money in that place aside from its accompanying offerings. So when he speaks about worth, he means the sacrifice excluding the flour and oil that's brought with it. Why? If he brought 2 oxen for a money, he did not fulfill his obligation. You might say, but it's oxen, and it is a money. But he said an ox, and each of these ox are not worth what. So he's brought in value, he's brought the same amount, and in volume he's brought more. But in quality, he didn't give what he committed. He said, I would give a money's worth an ox, and such an ox is not found. Each of those oxen are worth only half a money. Okay, now the next discussion, the next halachas will discuss if a person's animal that he wanted to bring is no longer able to be brought. What does he bring instead? So if a person says this ox is as a burnt offering, so this is not a neder, it's an adaba, meaning it's not a pledge that I'll give something. Rather he's saying, I'm giving this. So then it doesn't need to be an ox, it needs to be just something that's coming from this. So if it becomes blemished, then he could even give 2 animals to the volume of it, unlike in the previous halacha, because here it was on this over here, or the derivative thereof. If he brings even 1 ram for the price it receives, he also fulfills his vows, as long as the value of that gets brought to the altar in whatever way. If he says these 2 oxen are burnt offerings, and they became blemished, should he desire, he may bring 1 with the money he receives from their sale, again, because it's still on these items, or what comes off those items when he replaces them. This ram is a burnt offering, and it becomes blemished, so he can bring a lamb with the money he receives for its sale. If he vows a lamb and it becomes disqualified, he may bring a ram with the money he receives from its sale. Okay, so that's straightforward. If he says, I promise to bring a burnt offering, so now it's not an adama, it's not a particular gift that's here. Rather, it's a pledge, it's a commitment. So then now he needs to stick to what that commitment was. He said a burnt offering. So if he set aside an ox and it was stolen, he could also bring a sheep, because why did he commit? He didn't commit to an ox, he just committed to a burnt offering, in whatever form it may be. If he says, I promise to bring this ox, or its value as a burnt offering, then it's binding. And if the ox is disqualified, he will bring only an ox with the money he receives for its sale. Because previously he said this ox. Here he said this ox or its value. So somehow in this scenario, it needs to be an ox. It can't be a sheep. This probably can be fine-tuned, but for now, let's continue. So for the next 6 halachos, we're going to discuss when a person is vague, when they're not clear in their commitments. Either they're vague or the terms that they use have certain connotations, have certain meanings. So let's look at that. If he says one of my sheep is consecrated and one of my oxen is consecrated, but he had 2, so then the larger one is consecrated. So if he says one of my, he should give the better of the 2. If he has 3, the larger one is consecrated. A concern should also be shown for the middle one, because he said the larger and he didn't say the largest. So what does larger mean? Does larger mean the larger of them all, which is the largest, or larger meaning not the smallest? So then it needs to be concerned about the larger and the largest. He should bring the largest, and regarding the larger one, what should he do? He should wait until it becomes blemished so that the holiness will fall on the larger one alone. If he says, an ox from my oxen is consecrated, the larger one is consecrated and concern need not be shown for the middle one. So if he says the larger, so then we have doubt. If he says just an ox, then he should give the best of his oxen. If he designated one of 3 animals as the sacrifice and forgot which one it was, or his father told him one of these animals was consecrated, was made holy to be brought as an offering, and again, he's not sure which one it is. What should he do? He should designate the largest one as consecrated, and through that he'll fulfill his obligation. Similarly, if one vowed to bring a burnt offering from cattle and designated an animal as a sacrifice to fulfill his vow, and later forgot whether he had designated an ox or a calf, was it young or old? Bring an ox. Similarly, if he designated a sheep and forgot what he designated, bring a ram, which is older. If he's designated a goat, bring a grown goat, not a kid. If he forgot the species from which he designated the burnt offering, bring an ox, which is the best. And now he should bring one of all 3, because he already designated on a particular one and he forgot which one it was. So he should bring 1 ox, 1 ram, and 1 goat. If he was in doubt that perhaps he designated the burnt offering from a bird, a fowl, then he should add a turtle dove and an ordinary dove. Why not just the best of the 2? I think because they're considered 2 different species. Yeah. Okay. More on ambiguity. When a person vowed to bring a thanksgiving offering or a peace offering, korban taita or a korban shlabim, specifying that would be brought from cows, from cattle, but forgot what he designated to bring. Well, if it was an old cow or a young cow, he should bring both, an ox and the cow. So he designated something specific, and now he's forgotten what it was. So you should bring both. If he's unsure with regards to sheep, you should bring both, a ram and a ewe. If he's unsure with regards to goats, you should bring a he-goat and she-goat, male and female. Sorry, I got it all mixed up. It wasn't about age over here. Here it is about gender. If you forgot if you promised the male or female, we said if you promised one and you brought the other, you have not fulfilled your obligation. The previous scenario, we let him bring the best of it, of that type. Right? He said you should just bring an ox or just a ram or just a grown goat. But here, if you specify that it's a male or female and he forgot what he said, he has to bring both because there's no better or worse, as we discussed before. What happens if he specified a specific species and he forgot which one it was? So now he's got a lot to bring. He needs to bring a male cow, an ox, and a cow, a male sheep, a ram, and a ewe, a he-goat, and a she-goat. So he needs to bring 6 animals. Sometimes when your mind goes and you ends up costing. But you know what? When something's important, then you make sure to remember. Hashem should help us and save us from reaching a point where we don't have that ability. If he said, I promise to bring a burnt offering of chicken, then bring the 2 types, not chicken, of birds. You should bring the 2 types of birds, a turtle dove, or and ordinary type, because they're both considered birds. They'll both count. If he designated one particular species in his vow and forgot which one, then he should bring both. So if you just said a bird, it could be any type of bird, but if you said it was either one type or the other, then he should bring, whether it's a tor or a yoda, he should bring that type. If a person says, I promise to bring an offering for the altar, that's all he said. He didn't say which offering at all. He didn't even say what type of offering, not just which animal. So you should bring a handful of frankincense. Whereas nothing that is offered entirely on the altar in its immediate state except for frankincense. So the wording over here was, I promise to bring an offering for the altar. So you should bring the only thing that's brought as is on the altar, and that is frankincense. Yeah. If he specified his vow but forgot what he specified, he should bring every type of entity that is offered on the altar in its entirety. But what does that include? It means he would bring the burnt offering of an animal which is completely consumed, the korban oila of an animal, a korban oila of a bird, a korban oila of meal offering, of flour, and frankincense and wine alone. All of these can be brought as an offering, and these are the only types of offerings which are brought in their entirety on the altar. If a person says, I promise to bring an offering worth a seller, that's what I'm going to bring. I'm going to bring the value of a seller, which is a large silver coin in Talmudic times, to the altar. So you should bring a sheep. Why a sheep? Well, there's nothing offered on the altar worth exactly a seller except a sheep. I don't know how that works, because surely prices changed. Earlier we learned about how they would actually pay for a token and then use the token to get the animal. And we said that the tokens were actually dated, because the price might change from one day to the next. So I'm not sure how it's specifically a sheep that's exactly a seller. If you have any insight, you can share. If he specified a particular entity but forgot what he specified, then he should bring a seller's worth of everything that is offered on the altar. So he said a seller and he specified what type of animal it was, and then he forgot. So then he should bring a seller's worth of everything that could be brought on the altar. Wine, frankincense. Finally, when a person says, I promise to bring frankincense, levaida, you should not bring less than a handful. If one says, I promise to bring wood, you should not bring less than 2 logs. In the Hebrew, wood is plural. Eitzim. Harayolai eitzim. Why didn't they translate it as woods? Is that grammatic? Is there no such word as woods? Do you say in the plural, I guess you say 3 pieces? 3 woods. If I would. Anyhow, if he says eitzim, it's at least 2. And how thick should they be? As thick as a leveling rod, which is and how long? A cubit long, which we said is about half a meter. I promise to bring a piece of wood, not 8 sib, but 8s. Then you should bring one long log, a cubit long, not half a cubit, but a cubit. I guess that's when you're bringing one piece. That's the minimal. If he desires to bring the worth of the logs, he may. He could also either bring them themselves, and he could. And the kohen would be able to purchase the wood with the money that he brought. Okay. Sanctifying wine, oil, and levaida. What should a person who vowed a pledge or pledged to bring oil do? He should take a handful of it, put salt on it, toss it on the fire, and the remainder is eaten by the kohanim like the remainder of the meal offerings. What is done with wine that is brought independently? It is salted. Yep, believe it or not, everything that went on the altar needed salt. And then poured entirely down the shittin, which we said was a gutter system that went down under the altar, like the other libations. Frankincense, levaida, which is brought independently, should be salted and then offered on the pyre in its entirety. On the fire. And a person vowed to bring a sacrifice, he should not bring it from money for which the second tithe was redeemed. Shouldn't bring it from second tithe money, Maaseh Sheni. The rationale is that he became obligated to bring the sacrifice. Because now, see, he wasn't obligated, but once he made the vow, he now is obligated. And we said that you don't use Maaseh money for obligations, rather it needs to come from regular money, just like today. There's often a discussion what Maaseh can and can't be used for. 10% of one's earnings. One's required to give 10% of one's profits to tzedakah. Question is, are you allowed to use your tzedakah to pay shul membership, for example? And the answer is no. It's kind of like what you'd be able to get an 18A back on. If you're paying for a service that you're receiving, then it's money you're required to pay, so that you can't use Maaseh for that. So the same goes for if a person has Maaseh money and he made a commitment, so now he's required to fulfill that commitment, so he won't be able to use the Maaseh money to fulfill that commitment. The person says, I promise to bring a Thanksgiving offering from ordinary funds, and it's bread from the second tithe. Then he should also bring his bread from ordinary funds, because he vowed to bring a Thanksgiving offering, and that can only come with bread. So bread is part of the obligation. If it's part of the obligation, it can only come from ordinary funds. Finally, halacha 17. If he explicitly said, I promise to bring a Thanksgiving offering from money, from the second tithe, and it's bread from ordinary property. So now he's saying, so this is different. At the time of the pledge, before he was obligated, he said, what am I pledging? I'm taking something. And what is it that I'm taking? I'm taking money of Maaseh Sheni of the second tithe, and I'm using that as a Thanksgiving offering. And then the bread I'll bring from ordinary property. So then he can do so, because it was at the time of the vow, before there was any obligation. And also he's going to be able to eat it. Specifically, a korban todah is an animal that you're allowed to eat. So that also helps. If he brought it all from ordinary property, he also fulfills his obligation. Even though he said it would be from second tithes, why has he still fulfilled his obligation? I'm not sure. Similarly, if he explicitly said, I promise to bring a Thanksgiving offering and it's bread from the second tithe, he may bring it as vowed. He should not bring the bread from wheat that is the second tithe, but from flour purchased with money for which the second tithe was redeemed, like the animal which was purchased. So don't actually use the crop that is the second tithe, rather use the money that was gained from redeeming the second tithe, use that money to buy wheat, and then use that wheat as an offering. And now is time to test your knowledge. If one makes a vow to bring a male offering,